Hello everyone. In your science class during your secondary education, you would have encountered three states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Hardly would you have ever thought, like Zygmunt Baumann did, that it is not just sensuous matter that takes up these states, but also our society. Baumann's ideas are gaining more ground as history moves forward. That is to say, as we move ahead in history, it is becoming more common to understand the world with his words. He is considered the pioneer of the idea of liquid modernity. And once he got hold of that idea, he revisited it a bit later and hypothesized the cause of liquid modernity while presenting to us the effect of this form of social order through the phenomenon of consumption. So, today we are going to talk about the form of modern social order, its history, and its causes. Then we are going to shed some light upon how this is apparent in Baumann's analysis of the activity of consumption. Baumann was a socialist by vocation and he clarified his task, which also applies equally to other sociologists, that he never attempted to provide predictions about future. No sociologist should do that because no human is capable of being certain of the future. Then what's the task of a sociologist? It is to explain society. He looked at modernity and then questioned the fact that since Lyotard, philosophers, sociologists, historians, everyone has been obsessed with the idea that we have passed the modern era. And for the lack of a better term, they just added a prefix post to modernity, designating this new era as post-modernity. Now, when Baumann looks at the presentation of the postmodern condition in the writings of his contemporary, above all Lyotard, he finds a strange phenomenon in this literature. It is also hidden in the name. For example, if we look to the era before the Industrial Revolution, we find that we had something called a feudal social order. Then, with the advent of machines and steam engines, we enter the Industrial Revolution that made possible mass immigration and the discovery of the New England. What is distinguishing about this newness of Industrial Revolution is that everyone during the Enlightenment was convinced that their era was different, better, and new. Hardly did anyone stress upon the term post-feudal society. But anyways, this newness changed the historical reality massively. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, and Hume were all engrossed in understanding this social shift. While they were busy thinking about the changes brought about by new technology, nature also brought a sudden change in Lisbon that challenged not only the technical mode of production, the Industrial Revolution, but also the viability and justice of the natural order. In 1755, the Great Lisbon earthquake struck Europe. Now, these above mentioned minds of this time had to understand this great tragedy and figure out a way to deal with what they termed as moral blindness of nature. At this critical juncture of human history, which we also call the Enlightenment, the debate surrounded regarding the idea that an order which is morally blind cannot sustain for good. It must be replaced, and a new way of organizing society must be established with its source above and beyond nature, and at the same time, which is intentionally moral. They decided upon reason as the guide. They argued that since natural order cannot let the humans live a good life for long, and since the idea of the nation state is nascent but tantamount to the organization of society, therefore, natural order must be qualified with rational order. What cannot be done by natural order must be done by rational order. Hence, what follows, says Baumann, is the new kind of relationship between morality and rationality, hitherto outsourced to nature. Slowly, this industrialized world came to be known in the 20th century as the modern world. The concept of modernity gained currency quickly after the Second World War, but at the same time, there was skepticism amongst some leading sociologists like Lyotard that we are not really modern. Because the social behavior of societies and the way we organize them have passed the explanation given by thinkers of modernity. And one of the main thinkers within this current was Baumann himself. He first published Modernity and the Holocaust in 1989 and then coined the term liquid modernity with the book of the same name in 1999. Before we go on to liquid modernity, it must be stressed that Baumann's major concern in all of his writings, the undercurrent we can say, is human as moral being. He stresses upon the fact that there is no such thing as a morally indifferent action. Every human act has a moral cause to it. Morality is defined here as concern for oneself and others, and it is manifested at the level of judgment, not at the immediate level of the sensual act. The latter follows the former. It is important to underscore this idea here because this idea of human as moral being becomes even more pronounced in his last major work, Consuming Life. Furthermore, he wanted to bring morality back into sociological discussion because of its lack of discussion in most of the intellectual domains like philosophy, history, science, and sociology. Now, how does this relate to liquid modernity? Baumann explains that the marked difference between modernity and every era before it is the way we understand uncertainty and change in our society. During the first phase of industrial revolution, materiality mattered more than uncertainty. There was uncertainty, like the Great Lisbon earthquake, but the society at large was solidified because morality taught them, especially the revival of the Stoics, that no matter how uncertain the future could be, we as humans need to become solid in the face of it. That is to say, the ground on which our social order stands must be solid, whereas the ways of nature and destiny may attack us with numerous uncertainties. But in modern era, we have reached the point where the loss of moral spine has made us spineless, i.e., liquid. Now we are like a liquid in glass. You can stir it and it starts to change its shape rapidly with or without one's own will. The foundational principle of modernity is perpetual change. In this same vein, does Baumann argue that we are not postmodern, we are as modern as we were. In fact, we have become more liquid than before, i.e., more modern than before. According to him, the state and degree of liquidity determine the state and degree of modernity. And it is not just a philosophical hypothesis. This idea was also professed and won at the level of international politics. After the Second World War, there was a conflict between liquidity of democratic liberalism in the material form of the United States and the solidity or rigidity of authoritarianism in the material form of the Soviet Union. By 1990, the US had defeated the Soviet Union in this clash of civilizations, and liquidity won in the end, making it the conqueror that must now invade the countries with goodwill. In other words, because one political order which was more liquid gained an upper hand over a rigid order, it proved to the world at large that liquidity must be preferred over rigidity. The fall of the Soviet Union was a watershed moment for the acceleration of liquidity in our social order globally. This acceleration led to another crucial acceleration of change within the ideas of domain. This is the point in history where the idea of post-modernity became more ingrained amongst the intellectuals. That something has changed radically. Baumann agrees that there is some change, no doubt about it. But where he disagrees with the thinkers of postmodernity is that this is something different from modernity. According to him, the pace of the process of modernity has accelerated. This is the change. And since nobody has any new ideas to present us as to where we are headed, we are getting stuck more and more in the spiral of perpetual uncertainty. The best way to visualize this is to look at the spiral which is slowly moving. Our eyes could somehow adjust to it. This is early modernity. Now increase the speed of the visual spiral and you will not be able to adjust your eyes to it and go into a trance perhaps. This is contemporary liquid modernity. So Baumann argues that we are in a limbo. We know that the ideas of the past cannot solve our problems and we do not yet have the innovative ideas to address the problems facing us like mass immigration. Because after all, as Baumann explained, the acceleration in immigration is always because of liquid borders, liquid urban architecture, and liquid policies. Hence, the misinformed term postmodernity. We are in a new form of modernity, but we do not know where we are heading. As he repeated to our generation, that the question that will trouble us all throughout our lives would be, what should be done? Perpetual uncertainty has not only derailed us laymen, but also the thinkers churning out one theory after another about what is to come and what should be done. In other words, now perpetual accelerated uncertainty is not only outwardly manifested but also in our inwardness, in our philosophical outlook, and in our sociological theories. In other words, our philosophy, sociology, politics, entrepreneurship all have become liquefied. And not just liquefied, liquefied more than before. This is what Baumann calls liquid modernity. Until the fall of the Soviet Union, humans were living in a bipolar world where it remained to be seen which ideology would come on top. Or to be more precise, since we have a preference for superlatives, which ideology is perfect. And then in the early 1990s, once it was decided that the American ideology is the way to go, thanks to the fact that at that moment we had entered, as Krauthammer called it, a unipolar moment. Here's the rub. There was no competition to check our obsession with perpetual change, and that also of an American kind. There was no other model to vie for. Alberti, the great Renaissance art critic, said that perfection is a state which, once achieved, cannot allow for any further movement. Because any movement, any change can only be towards the worst. So, according to him, once the state of perfection is reached, there must be steadiness. But the American system was built upon the foundation that itself changed and promoted perpetual change. This is the reason the emergence of crises within the capitalist system are not anomalies. They are an inbuilt part of the social order. Since the unipolar moment, the two camps dissolved and authoritarianism lost its moral credibility in the eyes of global peers. The phenomenon that was pretty much local or shared only by a few allies of America gradually became part of international politics. First, there was perpetual change, perpetual motion, perpetual innovation in the United States and other Western liberal democracies, but then everyone adopted this model. Now, as Alberti reminded us that we need to keep an eye out for the state of perfection and become steady and achieve a kind of equilibrium state with moral spine, otherwise we will reach the summit and cross it without knowing that we are now past our prime and have begun our downward journey away from the summit. This is exactly what happened in the case of American empire. The horror show in Vietnam, the massacre across the Middle East, the failed attempt to seem big through NATO in front of Russia, which has led to the crisis in Ukraine, and the list can go on. Even though at the time of Saddam Hussein's overthrow and Gaddafi's ousting, it looked like America had won. But the American empire forgot Pericles' advice to not overstretch the empire no matter what. Even though hard power won in these cases, but America lost its soft power, i.e., its moral credibility. And now, as thinkers like Richard Wolff and Jeffrey Sachs have started to list down the immediate causes of the fall of the American empire, and we can see that now we are no more in a unipolar world. In fact, now it can be said that we are not even in a bipolar world. We have entered into the era of multipolar world. Now there is more uncertainty than before. Because as Baumann stresses that the spirit of Western system always highlights the importance of moving ahead. But all of this is just a fancy description of what has happened. As to the question of why did it happen, Baumann took some years to reflect upon it and then finally came up with the cause of the state of this perpetual uncertainty, which is ultimately the cause of everything else. The answer is the divorce between power and politics. To understand this cause, we need to first understand power and politics as he defines it. According to him, power is the agency, the capacity to do something. And politics is to decide what can or cannot be done. For example, if I want to drink a beverage, I can drink it, so I have power. But the choice of beverages is decided by politics. Like, at least in theory, in Muslim countries, alcohol is banned. Baumann claims that before the nation state used to have both power and politics in its hands, whereas now there is a radical divorce between them. Now nation state does have power, but politics has slipped into the hands of the big enterprises. And this is also the result of pushing the idea of perpetual change to the limit. There are always new enterprises coming up on the horizon. The idea of innovation, as well as the way we think about innovation, is under perpetual change. Now, the nation state is more concerned about outsourcing its functions, giving it to more economically efficient firms. It is remarkable that every single word of Baumann has shown its veracity in the recent American elections. A very few wealthy people whose names were not even in the ballot boxes are deciding the fate of America. This divorce between power and politics has made individual lives even more challenging than before. Power has now transcended materiality, and once the firms whose innovators were working in garages are now controlling cyberspace where power also resides. Now, when politicians have to portray that they have done a really good job, then they wait for the stock index to go up and flash it all across the media to verify their success. The standard of success has now been taken over by enterprises. Now it is in their hands to decide whether politicians are doing the correct job. And the behavior of the stock market is dependent upon the behavior of the consumers, on us. The more consumers they can attract, the better will be the stock index. This is the reason why Baumann said that every shop is a pharmacy, because every shop is selling moral tranquilizers. It seems that one of the central theses of Baumann's works has been that the reason for our spinelessness in liquid modernity is constant victimization of the moral self. The definition of beauty is not decided by moral reasoning, it is decided by our consumer patterns. Care for a loved one is decided by how expensive and fancy a gift we can buy for him or her. And since this requires a lot of money, we are perpetually working. And because the more we work, the more big enterprises reward us. Just like if I ask you to subscribe now, I would be getting a better return from YouTube. But what we often forget is that the real winners in this circle of life are those few oligarchs who have the ability to define praise and blame. And we are unfortunately in the process of increasing their power ever more. Thank you, everyone.